Friends, my name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega, and with me today I have Didi River. Yes, Didi.
Hi, how are you?
And we're going to talk a little bit about marriage equality and the nonsense that's going on in Australia at the moment. Unfortunately, there's a postal vote. Excuse me if I happen to put on my sunnies during this, but my eyes are a bit sensitive to light today, and I've got a big poxy mark underneath my chin, so I look great. And so we're going to talk about that because postal vote is really just it's really just a referendum on whether homosexuals are immoral, or not.
Really, whether we're equal persons.
Whether we're equal persons. It's lovely to leave something like that to the majority. That's not exactly what you'd call democracy, to be leaving the rights of minority groups in the hands of the majority, but there you go. And Australia is so backward at the moment. But anyway, I'll let Didi have a little bit of say about it. What do you think about this, Didi?
Okay, well, first off, it is not a vote. It is an opinion poll. It's kind of like American Idol. It's a voluntary opinion poll. It has no legal weight whatsoever. So the only point of this is that the government has said, unless they have this, they're not even going to look at the legislation. So it's a delaying tactic, because they know that if they had a free vote, a conscience vote in Parliament, that they'd lose, that there would be marriage equality. And so the homophobes in government have managed to put this as a delaying tactic, and they're allowing, you've just covered up the camera.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Your thumb is beautiful, but...
Here, I'll hold it so you don't have to.
Okay. It's a delaying tactic so that people can just not look at the situation. And it also gives a chance for a lot of advertising about whether or not gay and lesbian people are fit human beings. And
we're not.
Fit
to
marry. Yes. Well, that's the whole idea. And it's mainly been the Australian Christian lobby, which exists only apparently to trash gay and lesbian people, trans people, and other queer people. It doesn't do anything Christian other than that. And that seems to be how they define Christianity, as homophobia and transphobia.
Jesus would be appalled.
Jesus would. And I mentioned transphobia because one of the main tactics, since Australia, for the last several good, scientifically valid opinion polls, has shown that they support marriage equality and they're not homophobic. Yay. So it's yay. It's hard for them to use homophobia itself as a way of trying to dissuade people from marriage equality. So they've pulled in transphobia. They talk about, this is a slippery slope. Oh my God, they'll be teaching children to wear dresses in school.
Yeah, really.
And this is the kind of thing they do. And they pull in things like, gay people, they abuse children. Yeah. And gay people, their children have a terrible time. They're much worse off if they don't have a biological mother and father. It doesn't matter that there's an awful lot of children who are living without biological parents.
And don't forget the report, Didi, that they did, I think it was last year, remember? That report they did, they brought out, and it showed that children in gay same-sex marriages actually fare very well. Is that true?
Well, that's true. They generally fare better than the general population. And that's, I'd say, a large part, not because they're same-sex couples, but because one thing about same-sex couples and children is every child they have is a wanted child. There's no accidental children in same-sex couples.
No, that's true.
And I think if you measured them against the opposite sex couples who had wanted children, it would probably come out pretty much equal. So I don't think it's really that they're better off, but the statistics show that they are.
So tell us about...
And this is not just last year's report. I mean, there's been study after study after study after study that's shown effectively the same thing, that the children of same-sex couples are in no ways worse off than the children of opposite sex couples, whose parents are in opposite sex couples.
So who's been the main offender, Didi, in all of this? Like, can
Well,
you tell us the worst stuff that's happened since it happened?
Well, Lyle Sheldon of the Australian Christian Lobby is the biggest offender. Although there was an Orthodox priest who, they were having funeral rites in the Orthodox Church. They have a ceremony, a ritual for somebody 40 days after they have died. And this woman was a lesbian who had died, and virtually all of the audience were either her family or friends who were gay and lesbian. And he got up and started talking about all gays should be shot.
Yeah.
Now,
He sounds like a
this
charmer.
is the sort of thing that you get on the no side.
And young children see this kind of thing.
And young children see this.
And they're the worst,
the family were
badly affected.
incredibly, hurt by this. Most of the congregation at that point got up and walked out.
Yay.
But that's disgraceful in basically a part of the funeral ceremonies or funeral rituals for somebody, to have somebody, a priest, attacking them genocidally.
So why
and that's probably been the worst situation.
Why do you think that this small group of rabid homophobes are given such prominence in the media, in the Australian media today?
Okay, well, I think it's a case of the media want to do that. Oh, look, there's conflict here. We're going to be even-handed. So let's find the worst homophobes we can to speak on one side, and then we'll get somebody from the marriage equality side on the other.
It's great as clickbait, isn't it?
It's clickbait. It's basically because the media are businesses, and they are best served when there is conflict, because it increases their viewership. And if they can generate conflict with all of this, they will, and they do.
And Didi,
and that's why.
Tell us about, the safe schools thing. Like, how do you think that safe schools, like, they keep dragging that in? So if you could just...
Okay, yeah. The Safe Schools program is an anti-bullying program for schools, and it's particularly to try and reduce the bullying of gay, lesbian, gender-diverse kids, because these kids do get bullied. This is a long history of that. It almost always affects people badly. Even if you're strong, even if you kind of ignore it, the isolation, the need to just separate yourself from other people, to just ignore the insults, and to continually watch for the bullies who want to waylay you, and that kind of stuff. And this is a reality, because when kids, when adults are gay, lesbian, LGBTQ, they can always go somewhere, where they can be accepted. They can surround themselves with a circle of accepting friends. They often do get supported by their families. It generally tends to be only the really, hardcore Christian fundamentalist types,
Yeah.
or other religion fundamentalist types who reject them. That rejection often means that children are made homeless. I mean, one of the things that happened when they first announced this survey was that one of the ABC presenters, the public television presenters, came out, and on Twitter she said just the day before she'd known of a young boy who had come out to his parents at 15 and was thrown out of home and had been made homeless. And yet, these homophobes, the Australian Christian lobby and stuff like that, will talk about the need for a strong family. And it's such a joke.
Yeah.
Because same-sex couples are very loving of their children. The children who tend to be abused, thrown out. I mean, I've known, in some of the counseling I've done, I've run across someone who had come out as trans and was told his father got a shotgun out, walked into the door and said, "You come back here and I'll kill you." And this is a reality for LGBT people.
It's appalling.
Yeah, it's appalling. And it's generally those really strong, homophobic, often fundamentalist Christian families that behave this way.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea that these groups are Christian, it's like saying the Westboro Baptist Church is Christian. It's just not. It's just a nonsense, and it's really sad that they do that to that particular and call themselves Christian. I mean, there's nothing about it that's Christian. But Dee Dee, so in the end, when is this actual? When is this postal vote going through?
Okay, well, the postal vote, it was actually challenged in the High Court because the government illegally, or I guess now legally, managed to get $112 million to create this opinion poll. And
which could be put toward
homeless,
homeless
towards
LGBT
homeless people.
Yeah, but instead
it could have been put towards
lots of things.
A lot of things.
Yeah, and it is like you say, just a referendum on whether homosexuals are wrong or
really there's basically
they're just
no
wrong,
reason.
Aren't they?
There's no reason whatsoever to exclude same-sex couples from marriage, other than that people don't like gay people. Basically, they think, homosexuals are not good. We don't want to encourage them.
You're not good. I'm not good. We're all not
good.
We're
all not good.
We're not good.
And we don't want to encourage them by allowing them to marry.
Yes. You don't want to encourage those homosexuals. And that gay agenda, you don't know what might happen after the gay agenda.
Well, that's part of their argument. I mean, the arguments are kind of ridiculous. It's like there's the slippery slope. What happens next? You have people, Tony Abbott, who is one of the people who actually holds power, although he's not the prime minister. He seems to be able to force the prime minister into doing things. He's not a very...
He used to be a prime minister, and then they tossed him out.
He used to be a prime minister, and then they tossed him out.
He's not very bright.
But they managed to have this stranglehold on the Conservative Party, which has power in Parliament.
But the Labour Party's tell everybody what the Labour Party did in Australia.
Well, the Labour Party,
Penny Wong.
The Labour Party basically has, when they were in power, Kevin Rudd wouldn't hear the.
Kevin Rudd is the ex-prime minister.
He was a prime minister. They threw him out. He was a Labour prime minister, and he wouldn't look at marriage equality. He was opposed to it, and he was replaced by Julia Gillard, a woman and an atheist, and a single parent.
Yeah.
Excuse me, not a single parent. An unmarried woman. Her partner. She's an atheist and so on, and she was opposed she wouldn't let them vote on same-sex marriage. And then Kevin Rudd got back, and he still wouldn't let them do that.
So they've been using that
So
as
they've
a
been
political
using that.
football.
They've been using, refusing to look at same-sex marriage for a long time.
Now they're all for it.
When
apparently.
they're out of power,
Yes,
they were
yeah.
hoping to get a bit more support from the LGBTI community, and Penny Wong is an out lesbian senator. She's, I think, the head of opposition business in the Senate, sort of like the whip would be in America.
Yeah.
But,
tell us what's the problem.
But Rudd, basically, the ALP were going to, they'd kind of promised her that they would take a position as a party in support of marriage equality. And when it came down to it, they basically betrayed her. She'd actually done a speech saying thank you for this about time. And then they betrayed her and said, no, it would only be a conscience vote until for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, something like that. And that means that if the opposition, which don't allow a free vote, a conscience vote, which they've consistently done, they've refused to allow a free vote, then the Labour Party, in allowing a free vote, would allow whatever homophobes there are in the Labour Party to vote against it and probably see it defeated. Now, it's worth saying that for several years, the general population has been in support of marriage equality, at least 60%. And among young people, it's more like 85, 90%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like the Parliament is well behind the population on this issue.
And what's the arguments against, you don't have to show me, arguments against marriage equality? And, you were saying the whole thing about, there is atheists that marry and there's...
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, some
that.
of the arguments against marriage equality is that marriage is a special institution that has a special meaning in religious terms, and it shouldn't be defiled by including, same-sex couples. Well, in the first place, if you have religious freedom, there are various religions, including Christian churches, that allow or would be happy to have same-sex couples get married.
Yeah.
Things like the Metropolitan Community Church, several of the Uniting churches, which is the third biggest church, the ministers there have said they'd be happy to marry same-sex couples. The Uniting Church is a mixture of the Presbyterians and the Methodists and so on. They did a survey of the Catholic Church, which is opposed, obviously, but something like 60% of Catholics are in favor of same-sex, of marriage equality. But it falls into a complete heap when you look at the fact that marriage is a secular institution, and currently, atheists, which are the biggest religious group in Australia, non-religious.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I see.
The non-religious group is now, bigger than any of the other groups.
Oh, fancy that.
As of the 2016.
They can never say that Australia's a Christian country.
Well, it's not. No.
There you go. Which they like to do.
Which they like to do.
Yeah.
Well, once upon a time, the Church of England was the official state religion of England.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
Please go.
But anyway, I'll go back. I don't want to get caught up in history. Currently, witches, the Wiccans, can get married as long as they're an opposite sex couple. I've been to a Wiccan hand fasting, Atheists get married. The people from the Church of Satan can get married. As long as they're opposite sex couples, then they can go in and get a marriage license, and they can hold whatever ceremony they wanted, black masses, whatever, you know. And so that
They don't have a
ship
problem
of,
with
there's
that.
they don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
So the idea that marriage is a specially sanctified, special, thing, that ship sailed a long time ago.
Yeah.
That ship sailed in 1900 when we decided that Australia would have religious freedom instead of being Church of England.
Yeah.
And so the only thing that's stopping same-sex couples, particularly, like same-sex couples who might want to marry in a Christian church like the Uniting Church, they can't do it because they're a same-sex couple. Satanists can do it because they're an opposite-sex couple.
Yeah.
And so it just
It's
becomes nonsense.
Yeah.
The whole thing is
It's
only...
a smokescreen.
It's a smokescreen. The issue is only that they don't like homosexuals.
Yeah.
They think
And why
homosexuals,
would you not like us?
and why wouldn't you like it? And, like that's one of the arguments. The other is that that you need to have, that marriage is all about reproduction, and because gay people can't reproduce with each other, that therefore they shouldn't be allowed to be married. Now, marriage is not about reproduction. There is no rule that you have to be fertile, that you have to only have children with each other. There are people who are old, who are well past breeding age. There are people who are infertile. There are people who are paraplegic and couldn't have sex. There are people, like all kinds of people.
It doesn't hold water.
It doesn't hold water.
What's the other
marriage has never been about that.
Yeah. What's the other thing that doesn't hold water?
The other thing that they like to talk about is, that there was that whole thing about gay people being abusive, which every study that they've done that's reputable has shown, and there's been many, has shown that that's not the case, that's just not true. The other one, there's this idea of the slippery slope that Tony Abbott said, well, people will be marrying the Harbour Bridge next.
Yeah, really.
Well,
don't you love that?
This slippery slope argument, it doesn't apply. Any change to the law has to be made in Parliament. It's like saying, originally, I think 12-year-olds could get married. And they made a law that said they had to be at least 16, and that law was changed in 1990-something to say they had to be 18. Is that a slippery slope? Are we going to see, the age limit creep up to 30 and 40 and 80? You can't marry until you're 80. It's ridiculous. Slippery slope arguments are stupid. They're just untrue. Are they afraid that trans people can marry? Well, I've got news. Since Ree Kevin, the court case Ree Kevin, trans people can get married. Trans people can get married as long as their legal sex is the opposite sex of their partner. Now, they force trans people, when they transition and change their legal sex, to divorce their partners, even if, they are still in love, they are still committed to each other, they've been committed to each other all along. They force them to divorce, lest, my God, we have same-sex couples. Now, that's just bigotry. That's just applying homophobia to break up marriages.
They've also been dragging in the thing about gender diversity and sort of trying to make it about that it's going to be what is it? What did they say about that? The
gender fluidity.
Yes.
Tony Abbott and stuff jumped up in Parliament and said, this is just the start of moving towards gender fluidity and imposing, forcing boys to wear skirts
Heaven
in
forbid
school.
we should break down these awful stereotypes that promote violence, like the terrible male stereotype. I mean,
Yeah.
heaven forbid we should
Heaven forbid
deconstruct
that.
that.
But like it's ridiculous, and this is where the safe schools thing comes in. They have been attacking safe schools because of this sort of thing, that it is, training children to be gay and transgender and this sort of stuff. I've got news for you. If you're not gay, you're not going to get trained to be gay.
Yeah.
And if you are gay, you're not going to get trained to be straight. If you are gender diverse, you may be terrorized into not expressing that.
Yeah.
You may be in fear of expressing that. But that's not the same if it's not being there. And allowing the expression of that isn't going to make anybody who feels happy with their gender any less secure. The only issue it will do is allow people who are gender diverse to express their gender diversity.
I also feel, this whole fear that is being shown toward this gender diversity thing is, if you keep these stereotypes going, of this rigid male stereotype, then you can always tap into that to promote war. You know what I mean? And if you keep those stereotypes going, it can keep the war machine going too. And they're afraid, that if this stereotype is really challenged, you know what I mean? For the good, and it's not this violence kind of thing that it's not this sort of terrible violence and no emotions and all that kind of stuff that that somehow that'll probably threaten the this war, threaten the whole imperialist war thing that Australia loves to participate in. You know what I mean? What do you think?
Well, I would say that that's true.
Yeah.
I also think it's a way of maintaining those differences between men and women, not for any good reason, but in order to maintain, the inequalities that are there.
Yes.
Like what really is the difference between men and women, and it's not going to affect who you're attracted to. Like all men are not attracted to all women. Some men are attracted to this kind of woman or that kind of woman. It really doesn't matter. You're attracted to whoever you're attracted to.
And that's okay.
You might be attracted to, men, women, anybody.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
And it should be okay.
That's your personal business. Who you're attracted to is your personal business.
Yeah.
These stereotypes, like that men have to be unfeeling, they can't cry, they have to be,
it destroys
tough.
people.
They have, it's not good.
No.
I'll tell you one bunch of family research and childhood research that's been extensively studied is the fact that these stereotypes are not good for children. They have all kinds of bad outcomes, including criminality, substance abuse, and all sorts of things.
And blowing their heads off because they can't take it anymore,
And blowing,
and
suicidality.
killing their families, killing all their families. That's a regular thing in Australia. Domestic violence is rampant.
Domestic violence is
and that stereotype,
a rampant thing.
The male stereotype is feeding that.
And the male stereotype and the female stereotype and the stereotypic relation between men and women, that men are in charge, that men are the boss, that women better shut up or get smacked.
That's still undercurrent, isn't it?
This is an undercurrent that's always is always there.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing, it adversely affects children. It's shown to adversely affect children. It adversely affects their grades. It adversely affects their further study. It adversely affects their employment opportunities. It adversely affects all kinds of things. The more they go for those really old-fashioned rigid, stereotypic gender roles. There's all sorts of teen pregnancies, all kinds of things have been linked to that and shown to be linked to that. Those notions.
You suffered a family that was your father was very, very rigid and stuff, and you suffered greatly. You had to leave home, didn't you, Dee?
Yeah, I ended up leaving home.
Yeah.
When I was about 15.
Yeah.
And,
so it's a you know firsthand what it's like to live in a family where those stereotypes are and you know Dee Dee's like older than she's 65, I'm 57, so we know we've been raised in the 60s and 50s, and things were, there was lots of problems. They were even worse then, weren't they? Than they are now, although it's still going on. It's just we pretend like society's moved on. But we pretend like society's moved on, but really it hasn't in a lot of ways, has it?
Well, society, I'd say definitely society has moved on.
Yes, in some ways.
But I mean, there's still a lot of people who are dragging their feet and would love to return us to those sorts of that sort of a world.
Totally.
I mean, people are wrapped at the moment with The Handmaid's Tale, which is the big new thing. But I mean, that's actually an old book, and it comes from, basically those kind of rigid, patriarchal, authoritative, punitive type of relationships.
Yeah.
And those are things that are actually advocated in the Bible. And happily, a lot of Christians have moved on from that.
But I mean,
but the people like the ACL, the Australian Christian Lobby, that's the kind of world they're asserting.
And also in the United States. In the United States, there's a bunch of full-on right-wingers that would love to return to that. Don't you think?
Oh yeah, there's full-on right-wingers here that would love to too.
Yeah.
And some of the worst homophobic posters that have been put up around have been done by a group called the Antipodean Resistance, which is an openly neo-Nazi group.
Oh, okay. I don't know that one. Antipodean.
Yeah, Antipodean Resistance.
Oh, okay.
And they have training camps.
In Australia?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
It's actually a growing phenomenon. They're trying to recruit people in universities and schools, and they're doing training camps where they teach them violence and hatred. And
Lovely.
it's basically anti-Jew, anti-woman,
Where's
That's in Australia.
I know, but where are they?
Well, I think
I'll have to
they're
look
Sydney, Melbourne,
okay.
Tasmania,
Okay,
I think, too.
Yep. Anyway, that's awful.
Yeah, it's awful.
Wow.
And, one would hope that this group would be considered a terrorist group.
Yeah. Obviously not.
Obviously not yet. Not yet. They should be.
Yeah.
I mean, really, do we want Nazis back?
Yeah, really.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that where, what people are after?
Anyway, but so did you want to say anything else about gender diversity and this so-called frightening slippery slope to God knows what?
Just that really the Safe Schools program, it is mainly directed towards the teachers in schools to teach them, to train them about how to deal with homophobic and transphobic bullying. Because there was a recent study that showed something like 60% of gender diverse kids have been bullied, I think up to the level of violence in schools, and something like 80% have been suicidal. And that's an atrocious figure.
Yeah, that's atrocious.
That's atrocious. And we really need to end, an experience that drives people to that level of despair.
Yes, and we'll never ever know how many trans people have killed themselves, because there's often people run into walls and things like that, and you don't know.
Yeah, a lot of trans people, particularly, for the transgender, transsexual community, it was almost axiomatic that people in the older periods, in the 80s, in the 90s, generally never decided to transition until they reached a point where, for them internally, the choice was either suicide or to do something about their gender dissonance.
Yeah.
And at that point, where death was really the only other, foreseeable thing, people were willing to, deal with the potential loss of employment, loss of all your friends, loss of your family, loss of basically everything.
Yeah.
In order to deal with your issues.
And then we get the...
And there's been the question of how many people who have suicided, who have run into trees, because a lot of people have said they found themselves aiming at a tree and then realized, or a pylon under a bridge, and realized that, this was because of their gender issues.
Yeah.
And the question is, how many people decided the other way?
Yeah.
That suicide was a better option.
Yeah. And did he talk...
And this is because of the discrimination that they were likely to face if they actually addressed their gender dissonance.
And did he tell us...
Happily, that's changing.
Yeah, and tell us, the ridiculous, the trans exclusive radical feminists, and I put feminist in quotes, talk about, what the sort of nonsense that they've been going on with in recent times, particularly.
Well, that's almost...
Do you want me to hold that for you?
A podcast in itself.
Oh, that's true. You can just do a brief thing of it.
Really, basically, you've got a very few feminists who, or people who call themselves feminists, who are reasserting the absolute notion that people are either male or female, and that anybody who is transgender and changing their gender is basically trying to somehow usurp and erase women.
And also infiltrate the women's movement.
Or infiltrate the women's movement. All this sort of nonsense.
Jeez.
Well,
the whole 1 million of them in the world are trying to infiltrate the women's movement.
Yeah, the 1 million.
The 7 billion against the 1
trans
billion.
People in the world are trying to erase the 3.5 billion women. Somehow I don't think so. Particularly since half those trans people are probably going in the other direction.
Yeah.
But it's crazy because trans people, particularly trans women, are generally extremely aware of how difficult it is for them to fit into society because of the way people treat them. The last thing they'd likely want to do is put themselves in a situation where, they're going to get even more targeted.
Yeah.
It's just like this ridiculous bathroom stuff, that you see in the United States. Well, a lot of trans people are worried about going into bathrooms anyway, And really, what do they want to do? They like a trans woman just wants to go in there.
They
just want to be able to get in there and do their business and get out. Before anybody gives them any trouble.
Yeah.
This notion that they're out there, wanting to
hovering
sexually
around
assault, women, and that's why they've become trans.
Yeah, really.
Well, that seems like a freaking huge price to pay, given that men sexually assault women all the time without going to those kind of lengths.
Yeah, really.
Like it was some ridiculous thing that somebody was, one of these TERFs was saying, the trans exclusive radical feminists. Well, they were in a bathroom and a man walked in. They didn't say that they were a trans person. They said it was a man who walked in. Well, yes. Men can actually walk in right now to women's bathrooms. There's nothing stopping them, except that women would probably say, look, get out of here. or scream. But I mean, like,
men have been in bathrooms and killed little children in Australia.
Yeah, men have, there was a case in Queensland where a little girl went into a bathroom and some man, he wasn't trans, he was just a man, went in there and killed her.
Yeah.
Like,
Terrible.
it's terrible. And it's
in a shopping
awful.
centre.
And this was in a shopping centre.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have anything to do with trans people.
No.
Trans people are generally,
They're having enough trouble.
Dealing with everything.
The issues.
They just, like, and, I don't know. If trans men can go into a man's bathroom without being assaulted, they will.
Talk about that trans man that went into a bathroom and some straight guys or whatever, some gay men helped sort of fend off an attack. That was nice. There was a nice story.
A good story.
Yeah.
There was it was a gay bar, and there was a trans man there, and he went to the bathroom, and there was a line, and the guy in front of him, was, "Hey, you shouldn't be in here, and started giving him a lot of shit. And he said, "You're not really a man," and this sort of thing. And there was two guys who were just strangers who said, No, that's George. He's my buddy. I know him. He's definitely a man. Back off. And the guy was so, tickled because, like, thank God he was able to avoid some violent confrontation with some transphobic gay guy.
I know, isn't that sad?
Which is really sad.
Really sad.
And was rescued by two strangers. And he went and thanked them afterwards and that kind of stuff. But it was,
Anyway, Didi, is there anything else you want to say about this? Because I might wrap it up now.
Not really. There's more I might be able to say, but like, it'd probably be worth talking about the whole turf thing.
Yes,
and about,
we'll do that. We'll talk about the whole turf thing
and about marriage equality and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we'll do that.
But
this is just a spontaneous thing that we decided to do, wasn't it, Didi? Because we're waiting for an appointment.
Yeah, I'm waiting for an appointment. So
yeah. So anyway, I'll wrap it up here. So is there anything else you want to say?
One last little bit.
Yeah.
The marriage equality thing. They've asked one question, which is, do you think same-sex people should be able to marry? And then they've tried to obfuscate and create fear in all kinds of ways. One of the other big ways they've been trying lately is saying, but where's the legislation? Where's the legislation that we can look at to see if churches are protected and all this kind of stuff? Well, churches are already protected, under the Marriage Act. But this is a really disgusting bit of obfuscation, since the whole reason that we're having this absurd Postal opinion poll is that they refuse to look at the legislation. It's just a way of delaying looking at the legislation. And now they're turning around saying, but where's the legislation? We can't support this without seeing the legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, if you'd wanted to create some legislation and vote on it, we wouldn't have needed to do this in the first place.
Yeah, really.
Drops.
Thanks so much for watching. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. My name's Trish Roberts, and this is Didi River. And I'm sure that we'll have Didi back on again because Didi's a wealth of information on a whole bunch of other topics. So till next time, bye for now. Friends, my name is Trish Roberts. Just as a little addition to this video, I wanted to add, after we drove home, Didi and I, we dropped into our local cafe, which happens to be run by two gay men who are a couple, and they have a sign at their door which says, "This small business supports marriage equality," and they also have a rainbow flag out the front. So, and then apparently, during the day, Erica Betts, who is a member of Parliament and he is a major homophobe, amongst other things. He's incredibly backward, and he's like, his politics is like straight out of the 50s, really awful. And he's a member in Tasmania. He visited the cafe yesterday, which is very, very odd that he should do that. And we were wondering whether he did that because he wanted to provoke a sort of some kind of confrontation with the owners of the cafe, which wouldn't surprise us at all. And if he did, and if he didn't, of course the owners, Steve and Dave, they allowed him to, attended to him and gave him food, but apparently a whole table of people walked out when he walked in. Like, he sat down and then they left without ordering. They came in, they saw him, and then they left. Apparently there's a lot of gay customers go into the DS Cafe. We're pretty sure that he just went into that cafe to provoke some sort of confrontation with the owners of the DS Cafe, and if he'd managed to successfully do that, which he didn't, that he could then claim that they were being bigots towards him or something. That'd be right, wouldn't it, Dee Dee?
Yeah,
Bigots?
I think he came in and then the table came in afterwards.
Yes.
Saw him and left.
Yeah, he came in, then the table came in afterwards, saw him, and then left. They didn't.
The group that came in.
The group that came in
had at least one same-sex couple in it.
Yeah, and there was at least one same-sex couple in the group that came in. So anyway, but that's sort of that doesn't surprise me that he did that, really, because I don't know what makes these people so hateful and so, to continue on that ignorance like they do. It's truly astounding, particularly 2017, the 21st century, to be holding on to those sorts of backward, ignorant, and hateful ideas. You really have to wonder what is the matter with them. But anyway, so hopefully he will never return to that cafe, because they'll definitely lose business if somebody like that comes in. He's probably, I think he's probably one of the most backward politicians in Australia, Erica Betts. Anyway, so that's all I wanted to say. So thanks very much for watching. You're watching Faint Signals from Vegan. My name's Trish Roberts. Bye for now.